of Choose Happy. The website is choose-happy.me, and hopefully that should appear in the post below. Amy, you and I are friends. You and I work together, and I was really happy to have this conversation today, just simply because by now, it's been over a year where, we've all been operating in this weird Twilight Zone kind of environment.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the headlines, if you look at, where people's minds are right now, I think everyone maybe most people are hopeful that we're kind of at the tail end here and maybe we're going to be able to get back to regular life. But that's not to say, Amy, that this past year hasn't been taxing. And, and there's been just a lot of implications of, maybe people who are used to working in a very social environment and have been working solo for a long time. And I also saw this news story, my wife pointed this out to me, about people are actually developing a little bit of nervousness about, going back, because we've now also been used to working in an environment. So, for those who are maybe about to go back to the office, or maybe it's just becoming more and more, we're getting together more and more and more professionally. Certainly the aspect I wanted to cover with you because, I just have so much respect for the work that you've done, academically, professionally, the people that you help, the companies that you've worked with to instill happiness. So that's kind of our big thesis for today, Amy. I'd love for you to kind of, just before we kind of get into some tips and ideas, some really actionable things that we can do, that we can instill happiness. And so for my friends that are watching this that are business leaders, maybe they supervise a group, or maybe you're just, showing up at work and, someone might be asking, what influence or what power do I have and what can I do? So Amy, before we get into all that, would you just explain a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge topic to tackle. And here live, Bridget says taxing is a great descriptor.
Yes, exactly. Right.
And truly,
Thanks,
taxing, that is a great word to use. And so at Choose Happy, and kind of what I do is, we're bringing value and meaning and happiness back to the workplace. And that sounds like, sometimes that can sound very pie in the sky, and it can sound like a really, I'm going to use Bridget's word again, taxing topic to tackle. But the reality is like when we approach it at a human level, we can really break it down. So a lot of times what happens is people go into organizations and we work with the leaders, and that's great. However, I believe that we need to work at all levels of the organization and tackle it not necessarily from a workplace perspective, but tackle it from a human perspective. So if we can change our team members, our employees to be more happy in life, that spills over to work as well. So one of the things that I say a lot is, like, we don't believe in work-life balance. We just believe in balance, in life balance. And as we sit in 2021, I should say it this way. I think the time of saying, keep your problems at the door when you walk into work, keep home at home and work at work. I think the times of saying that are over, because the line has been blurred so much as we have kind of progressed and developed over time. So that's why I say it's not about work-life balance. It's truly about life balance. And when we can become happier humans, then we can be more productive and a better asset for our employers at work. So that's kind of just like an overview of some of the things, that we work with. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of the most profound interviews that I remember on this sort of thing. You just said, leave your problems at the door. I interviewed Boo Corrigan, and at the time was one of the head coaches for the Army. the Army Academy. Sorry, I forget.
It's on the tip of your tongue.
Oh man, what is that called? Come on, someone help me out in the chat. Was like I know the Naval Academy, right? So the Army's version of it. I'm a former Navy guy, so forgive me, Army veterans. But I remember asking him about leadership in a military environment, and I was in the early '90s. It was still relatively old school, although it was starting to get a little bit more sensitive. But he said something, it blew my mind, because I did this interview, I want to say about 8 years ago. I was at the Army Navy game, and I just talked about leadership, and he said, he listed like discipline and blah 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 blah, but the third one he listed for effective military leadership today is empathy. And I was like,
yes.
What? I mean, that just like, I was like, forget the rest of like everything I was going to ask you. Tell me why a military leader, why empathy is important today. And as leaders, Amy, maybe you could talk about this, and I'd love to hear your answer for, if you are in a supervisory or a leadership position, why it's just so critical to be empathic in a team culture, that sort of thing, particularly whether or not we're getting together in person or just on Slack.
Yeah. So that is one of my favorite things to talk about, because empathy is okay, let's back up for a second. Like, let's just go 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when we looked at managers and leaders, we were not having this discussion about empathy. It was kind of like, hey, you do what I say because I'm the manager and I've got all these skills and all these great ideas that I promise if you do what I say, I can, move this organization to the next level. And to some extent, that is okay. But let me say this again, to some extent. Mm-hmm. So you're only going to go so far with that, and you're really not going to inspire people to want to really kind of work for you or work with you. So empathy is really, in my mind, it's about two things. It's about connecting with your team. And then on the other side of that, it's about your team feeling understood. Mm-hmm. And when people feel understood, they'll follow you anywhere because they know that you get them. Yeah. And when you get someone and you feel understood, it's like, let me just jump on your back and ride this ride with you. I will do whatever that you need me to do because we're both on the same playing field. Whereas I think the message before was very much of like this hierarchy, this person is higher than you. And so therefore you have to listen to them. But if we can understand that humanity is one level, that we do not have a hierarchy for humanity, then I think it really changes the perception of, if we're a leader, how we lead. And if we're a team member, how we treat our coworkers. Yeah. So humanity is just one level. Humanity is not a hierarchy.
I'm just thinking about this too. I love how you talk about, empathy being, just it transcends position. And I'm thinking about, as a leader, how important it is to have empathy for those that, are, might be more junior in the team that we're supervising and, we're expected to mentor and so forth. But, interestingly, I'm now thinking about, well, wait a minute. If you come in and you can tell that, the boss, is upset or frustrated or stressed or worried about something, to ask them, even though it might feel out of place, to say, hey, is everything okay? You seem a little, distressed today. And, that's very cool. Like,
yeah,
I think that as a leader, to have someone, even though it might feel really uncomfortable and it might feel very out of place, just to show that you care. Boy, you talk about what a lasting memory that will have for that person that you work with that, might be higher than you in the food chain or, the chain of command or whatever, right?
Right. Well, I think sometimes as leaders, we may, like, the old school way is to build walls. And because when we build walls, then we create this distance between us and those who work for us. And that just simply doesn't work anymore. I remember when I was in corporate America. Now, this was over 10 years ago now, but I was a very young manager. So I was a manager right out of college. And I'm sure that people felt like I had no business being a manager and leading. And so it created a very interesting challenge when I was in those positions. And so one of the things that I learned is, and this is not what I would say now, but what I learned from other people was, hey, if you create this wall between you and your employees, don't even worry about it if they, don't trust you. Don't even worry about it. But the reality is that could not have been the worst advice. That could not have been the worst thing to do at that time. And I think as I grew as a leader and a manager, and where I am today as a leader, or where I ended when I left corporate America as a leader, was very, very different than how I started. And I had to kind of find my way on my own a little bit. And but man, I think if I would have come out of the gates having empathy, if I would have come out of the gates being an authentic, true person who cared and understood and wanted to understand, how much different I would have been, but how much more impactful our organization could have been as well. And so, of course, that came over time. But that is not how it started. And in a lot of ways, I'm really ashamed of that story. But in a lot of ways, I'm really proud of that story too, because I came out the other end understanding that.
So, my next question is about instilling happiness. And I wonder if someone thinks about this, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to create more positivity in the workplace, right? And so I'm going to come in and I'm going to be all Pollyanna, and I'm going to just be, it almost feels like putting on an act, right?
Right.
I could see how, some folks might think of it that way. But that's not what we're talking about. How do you instill, whether you're a leader or whoever you are in the workplace, what are some good, additional practices that you can do if you're like, it kind of gloomy around here and it's not good for my mental health, right? Or like we just recognize the value, even from a like Machiavellian viewpoint. It's like, we want more productivity. Well, happiness will in the workplace will absolutely increase productivity and results and revenue and all of those sorts of other things. But what are some of those great ideas that we can instill that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to address one thing that you said, which is what we call in like the positive psychology world called false positivity. So false positivity is kind of what you were insinuating, where somebody comes in and is like, "No, today's great. Hey, everything's gonna be great." On a personal level, like the best example I can give is, somebody, and this is a pretty deep example, but I think you'll get it really quickly. If somebody is like diagnosed with something terminal and we come into that person and we say, it's going to be okay, just think positive, everything's going to be fine. Like that's false positivity. And we don't want that, especially as leaders.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like even the look on your face says it all, really.
Yeah. And Amy, as you're saying that, I have a lot of personal experience with a culture that I used to be a part of that was just a lot of that. And you weren't allowed, it was frowned upon to be, and obviously there's a limited, how personal, how vulnerable you want to be. But then again, to just put rather than empathy and sharing true concern for someone, to say, oh, well, the guy upstairs knows blah, 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 has a plan for us all. And it's like, ooh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I get that that's your story. Cool. I respect that that's for you. I don't know. I don't know that that's really effective.
Yeah. Well, in some cases, it feels a little condescending as
Yes.
well, and
Yes.
you certainly don't want to come off that way. And look, I talk too, and I write about this in my book about having positive and negative intention. And so I think you have to also take a step back and go, well, did that person have negative intention behind what they
That's very
said? And
fair.
if the answer is no, you have to give them a little bit of grace, if you will.
Sure.
However, I think when we know better, we do better. And so we may have found, like, somebody listening may go, oh, I've totally done that. Well, you know what? That's okay. So, but now just recognize it and understand how you maybe can kind of change your ways a little bit. So, as leaders, we don't want to go in saying everything is great when maybe everything's not great. So, that's false positivity. We don't want to
Mm.
do that. We want to address what is actually happening realistically. As far as like your question goes about, how can we have a happier, more positive work environment without just coming in and going, yay, let's build slides. And, like, we're not Google. And the work environment has changed drastically over the last year. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to saying it's not just about working with leaders. It's about working with everyone of the organization. And when you look at it this way, you understand that the same principles apply. Whether you are a CEO, whether you are a VP, whether you are in sales, like, it does not matter what you do for the organization. All of these rules apply. And one of the best things that anyone can do for themselves and for the organization is understand what their values are and how that aligns with the organization. Because when you get to this point and say, well, I value XYZ and the company values ABC, then you can say, how can I bring more meaning to what I value? And so instead of saying, like, what is the meaning of my job? You ask yourself, how can I bring more meaning into my job? And that will change the perception of not only how leaders lead, but how we all show up every single day at work. And we'll show up very, very differently when we ask ourselves it in that way.
Yeah. So, Amy, and by the way, to anyone who's watching this, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this after the fact, I wanted to mention, Amy, that your website is choose-happy.me. And I know you've got resources, you've done lots of podcast interviews, you've done a lot, you do a lot of good in the world. Would you kind of share maybe some of the resources that you make available?
Yeah. So, when we talk about from a work perspective, the one of the greatest things that we do is workshops and working with your team and speaking. One of the really cool things that we are rolling out now to organizations is our program called My Mobile Mentor. And what My Mobile Mentor does is it allows your team to have access to a mentor to up level their life, to achieve greatness, to achieve those goals. And I kind of think of it like this. It's kind of like if you know that you need to work out, let's say, or you need to exercise. Well, you can go and wake up in the morning and go, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, or okay, I'm going to go to my spot where I'm going to work out. But if you don't have a plan of what your workouts are going to be for the week or what workouts you're going to do that day, then you're just kind of making it up as you go along. And your results are not going to reflect what they would if you actually had a plan on what your workouts are going to be every
Yeah,
single
for
day
sure.
or a few times a week or whatever it is that you've determined. It's the exact same thing. But we look at it from a life perspective. So sometimes we need that mentor that we were talking about earlier. Like, we need that mentor to be there for us to help push us, but not only that, to create a pathway for us. A lot of times, what I have realized over life, one of my favorite sayings, and it's not mine, it's a very well known saying, but is you can't see the forest through the trees, you know?
Hmm.
So here we are, we can't see the forest through the trees. And so that's what My Mobile Mentor does. It pairs up your team members with a positive psychology practitioner, and helps you to define what is that pathway based on what type of life satisfaction you're going for, and what is that custom pathway for you in order to achieve those goals. And it's a really cool thing that organizations can offer their team, their employees, as we continue to work on bringing happiness not only to the workplace but to individuals' lives.
All right. So I've got a team meeting on Monday. And Amy, I want to take some great advice from you, and I'd love to implement this. I've got a leadership meeting, and then I kind of have like an all hands account manager meeting. What would be some good things that Josh could do for his team on Monday morning?
Okay, let's start here. I love this. Let's start here. One of the things that I would do, I'm going to go back to values because it's like one of my favorite things. It's a really good place to start. And so one of the best things that you can do if you're just getting started is go into that meeting and have people identify what are their top 3 values, personal values. And we have 55 core human values. However, that doesn't mean that, whatever somebody chooses, if it's not on that list, it's not okay. So have them choose their 3 core values and then have the discussion and identify, if you have not already as an organization, what are the organization's top values. Have them put them side by side and go, okay, where do we match up and where don't we match up? And if we don't match up, how can I use my day-to-day job, my day-to-day career, my workplace attitude? How can I use that to bring more meaning to my personal values? And just have them come up with a couple of things to say, okay, well, these are my values. Here's how I can bring more meaning in my job to those values.
To the company values? So Go ahead.
To their personal values. So if their personal values do not match up with the company values, that doesn't mean it's a mismatch of life, right? Doesn't mean like you go quit your job and go find something else. That's not it. So if they do match up, it's really easy because now you go, okay, I value this, they value this. So now that means that I can bring that same value every single day and it will up level the organization.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking. It's almost like, it's like, well, what are so we're the Justice League or we're the X-Men or whatever, the Avengers or whatever. What are your superpowers? Oh, well, I am just really big on like equality. It's like, great. So one of our core values is, how could you use equality into, our value of democratization, for example, which is a different take on that, right? And so that's great because if I have 5 people and they're each coming at it with, it's like, well, I've got Thor's mighty hammer and I can shoot lightning bolts out of my fingertips. It's like everybody's got their thing, their version of how they can support maybe that company value.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yep, 100%. Yeah. So, yep. And it's really all about bringing, the end result is creating more meaning for your team, because when they feel like that they're a part of something meaningful, now we know that productivity increases. We know that they're happier individuals. They're more joyful. They'll put in more, effort. They're more creative and they'll come up with more ideas. And it's just really a win-win for all.
I like this because this feels validating. Like if someone asks me, Josh, what makes you what drives you? Like, what are your core values? And then I am able to express that. Like, I feel heard. I feel validated. Like, this is the kind of environment that I want to work in, where it's like, imagine when you're working for someone and like it just feels like there's just a values misalignment, right? I don't think people stick around for very long when there's a big disconnect or, going in opposite directions. So I share that, as a leader, how valuable that this might be. And the temptation oftentimes, I believe, is what are the tasks that let's talk about the tasks that need to get done this week, right? And I find ourselves, like in our meetings, often, we love, report and kind of talk about what's, what people are doing in their personal lives and that sort of thing. But oftentimes then I think we jump to tasks really quickly. And there's a cost to that. And as much as we look at, we're going to talk about feelings. Well, that's like an investment in time when it's like, we got these tasks that we really need to talk about. But Amy, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that about why it's important. You got to invest this time. And if you don't, there are costs to that.
Well, it goes back to the very simple equation of thoughts control our feelings control our actions. So you want to talk about tasks, you want to talk about actions, right? However, if you want them to take the right actions and, just explode in what their capabilities are, then you have to talk about feelings because our feelings control our actions. So you can talk about tasks and what needs to be done, but if they're sitting there going, whatever, I hate this job, I don't trust this person, this coworker drives me crazy, and it makes me feel like unimportant, it makes me not feel valid, all of these things, then you can talk about actions all day. But guess what? They're not going to be effective if you don't back up and talk about feelings. So I know it feels kind of like woo-woo, especially like in an organization to talk about feelings. But if you want that action, then you got to back up. I mean, that is just basic psychology. Thoughts control our feelings, which control our actions. So let's have the awkward conversations in the workplace. And the more we have these awkward conversations, the less awkward they become.
Amy, who do you work with and how do you help them? Like what size organizations? Where do you step in? How do you fix things? What do you fix? What pain do you solve?
Yeah, so we work with all sorts of different organizations. I mean, I did one for Pfizer here recently. We've got a couple assisted living facilities coming up. I've worked with government entities, and I think a lot of times when we hear certain things like our employees are just disengaged, or there's a lot of gossip in the workplace that tends to be one that I hear a lot. Or you just feel like maybe that there's not a lot of trust within the organization. Those are like really common pain points that people say, and then they come and say, "Can you help? Can you fix?" And the short answer is yes, of course. The longer answer is let's talk about what the root problem is and why even started to occur to begin with. So yeah.
And I'll just, again, business leader to business leader, I'll just tell you that it's so incredibly naive to ignore the elephant in the room. If you know that it's there, you feel it, it's like, but you ignore it, you don't want to address it because it's messy or uncomfortable, or you don't have the time to do it, it will come. It will absolutely rear its ugly head if you don't proactively address those culture things.
Yes.
Amy, when what would be the next steps for somebody like do you do like discovery calls, exploratory calls, where you just kind of like, the doctor is in and you invite, someone to have just a conversation with you about what's going on in their organization, and then you could kind of maybe make a prescription for them and talk about, how you might help?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. And so if anyone is interested or just even wants to bounce the idea like, hey, is this something that you see, or is this something that maybe you can help with? Let's just chat. I think that that's a really good place to start because, as you say, the elephant in the room, I don't even know if I rewatch this recording, if my body language shows, but as soon as you said that, I went, because like I felt it too. Like I remember those times, and so it is not going to go away. So let's just chat and see if there's something, some form or fashion, or can get you going in the right direction.
I know it's my personality type. I just, growing up, like you just didn't leave stuff unsaid or unaddressed. You just dealt with it. So, but meanwhile, I knew of other family members who, had this bitter thing, that was just never resolved or addressed. And to me, that's so painful. So leaders,
Yes.
don't know what you're going on in your organization, but I can tell you firsthand, having worked with Amy now for many months, Amy has an intuitive, she knows how to ask the right questions. I would imagine, Amy, that a lot of your work might be uncovering things that leaders are probably not even aware of. Like that it's just,
That's right.
In this undercurrent that maybe they suspected. But listen, all of this stuff, it's affecting turnover. It's affecting every metric in business. And so I kind of look like at working with you, Amy, is kind of like going to the doctor. Like if you are the leader of an organization, you just got to take your body to the doctor for your annual physical and checkup once a year. Say, all right, doc, everything all right? And so having you come in and say, let's check things out and see where there's opportunity for improvement. Because we don't want you to lose your key employees. We don't want someone to be miserable at work. We don't, if everybody is, 2 shades of gray off of where they could be, is that something that's fixable? And if it were fixable, what could the outcome be? So, Amy, I appreciate your approach to your generous soul, your website right down there at the bottom of the screen, choose-happy.me. And do you have a schedule link on there, or where do people go?
Yeah, they can go, well, let me give you the email address, because that just will give you direct contact with me. So that's amy@choose-happy.me. So AMY at choose-happy.me.
I'm actually Amy at, I'm goofing around on a new platform here. So I apologize if there's been like some weird technical things here, but sure. Let's see if I can. Yeah, look at that. Amy, did I get that right? Amy at choose-happy.me.
Yeah. Perfect.
Hey, okay, good.
Hey.
Well, Amy Dix, again, thank you so much. There's your email address on the screen. There's your website right there. I can vouch Amy's good people. It's been a delight to work with you on a couple of different projects, and you're always just a good influence on leaders. So I'm very grateful that we get to work together. So again, Amy Dix, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Choose-happy.me. Thank you, Amy.